Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop RPG news, interviews, and game design podcast. Yes, I did not say number one in all the realms because I would get in trouble because we have here in place of Teos, Ben Byrne. Hey, Ben.
Hello, Shawn. Thank you for inviting me back to everybody's favorite RPG podcast in all the realms.
Yes. So, for anyone who has not seen the Eldritch Lorecast or has not seen you previously on this show, could you just give a brief introduction to who you are and what you do in this here industry?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, I'm the host of the Eldritch Lorecast, which, Shawn, you are also a co-host on, along with James Hake and Dale Kingsmill. We're also a weekly podcast that cover news, current affairs in the tabletop industry, but also talk about, game design and things like that. We run a YouTube channel, the Ghostfire YouTube channel, where we also provide GM tips and advice, particularly around, but not exclusively, Grim Hollow, the dark fantasy setting for 5e, which I am also the creative director of here at Ghostfire Gaming.
You sure are, and you're directing the hell out of it, let me tell you.
I'm trying to.
It is a thankless but also very fulfilling job. I would assume.
Yeah, for all the stress and this, anybody who works within the tabletop industry or any sort of hobby industry, I suppose, for all the stress that you are reasonably put under, and I say reasonably there, you do have to occasionally stop and remind yourself, like, would I be doing anything else? No.
I would be sitting here at this desk writing or thinking or talking about game design. So, hey, why not get paid for it?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you for being here. We're going to do the same thing that we do when Teos is here. We just make it a little bit shorter. So we'll take a question, we'll get to some brief news bits, and then we'll get into a game design topic. This week, that game design topic is making your RPG and D&D world dangerous. Something that Ben and I have been trying to do for the last few years and really trying to do for the last few months as we redesigned Grim Hollow Transformed. This is from Fox Trick via YouTube. And this ties into one of our bits of news. So here we go. Why is there so much advice for new dungeon masters, but so little structured onboarding for new players in TTRPGs? Beyond pre-generated character sheets, what are the best ways to help new players get comfortable with tabletop RPGs? Are there effective step-by-step guides or resources designed specifically for introducing brand new players to RPGs? Why don't online tools like Pathfinder or D&D Beyond have dedicated, quote, new player sections to ease onboarding? What are some practical ways experienced players and DMs can introduce newcomers without overwhelming them? Thank you so much for answering my question on the feedback. Your answer was well beyond my hopes. So he had asked about a previous topic and then followed up with this one. We're going to talk about the new 2024 D&D starter set in our news segment. So we'll get into a little bit of that then. But let's take these questions one at a time because I think each one might have an interesting answer. So why is there so much advice for new dungeon masters, but little for new players in TTRPGs? It's because the DM is the most important person. And I don't say that as a value judgment on players. I say that as the game has always expected, and tabletop role-playing games in general have always expected the dungeon master or the game master to carry that load. So you want to teach the game master how to do their job, because if they know their job, that's translating into being able to bring new players in, at least in theory. Does that sound reasonable, Ben?
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
What else do you see here in this question of player content, new player content versus GM content for help?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely more tools for onloading players than the question necessarily assumes. There's free rules on D&D Beyond, which everybody can access and players can access to kind of familiarize themselves with the rule set. There's the character builder itself on D&D Beyond, so players arguably get access to the coolest feature of D&D Beyond. I don't know how good the walkthrough for that is for a first-time user. I know D&D Beyond used to have a bit of a situation where everything was accessible and you'd have new players rocking up to a table equipped with like Vorpal swords because it was just in the drop-down menu of equipment to choose. So maybe that's gotten a little bit better. Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't used it recently, but it's a very good toolkit for giving players a space to go and play in, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And play with the character builder and try lots of different builds and create lots of different characters to see how the system works.
Yep. There's also a ton of content on YouTube, TikTok,
Yeah.
all the places where people go to watch their videos. Well, I was going to say multiple times more than there used to be, because there didn't used to be. Right. It's a tool that is still not registering for some folks who maybe didn't grow up with that. So they always go to a book. They always go to
Sure.
a site. They're always looking for the box set. They're always looking for the starter set when there are all these other tools out there.
Yeah, I think with YouTube in particular, which is kind of my playground, so to speak, it's where I learned a lot of GMing tips and things from folks like Matt Colville and WebDM. I think certain channels I would shout out, particularly probably the Dungeon Dudes, the Ghostfire YouTube channel, which we create, and WebDM, who haven't been around for a little while now, but they are older videos I used to watch religiously. And I think they have there's a lot of great GM advice in there, but I think they also have some really good player advice videos, not just in like how to make the sickest build you can or how to like, cast this crazy spell using this rules hack. But I remember WebDM had a lot of really great videos that was just like, here's a video about paladins and all the ideas we can think of about how to role play and build a cool paladin that is thematic to the game that you're gonna play in. I found that very inspiring for NPCs as well, but it was also targeted at players. So there is
Yeah.
stuff out there.
And I'm going to follow up by reading the next question.
Mhm.
Beyond pre-generated character sheets, what are the best ways to help new players get comfortable with tabletop RPGs? And for me, this is the question. This is the crux of it. Because in my experience, most of the learn to play content, whether it's video content or starter sets or intro adventures, those sorts of things, never quite got down to the level that some people come to the table at, right?
Mm.
They always assumed a little bit more than the players knew. They always assumed a little bit more knowledge than the players had. And this is the area I think where we need more work from folks like Wizards of the Coast and some publishers who can meld uh, the experience of this play through tactile things
Mm.
and a process that is easy to understand. And so, my first thought when I read this part of the question was, obviously, the best way to get new players comfortable with tabletop RPGs is to bring them into tabletop RPGs slowly. So if you're learning
Sure.
to play, if you're learning to read, you don't pick up War and Peace, right? You pick up Dr. Seuss and you learn these little words. It's got to be the same thing with tabletop role playing games. You have to introduce these very small elements that are engaging, are interesting, but are also understandable. And
Mm.
so when I made Peril in Pinebrook, that is exactly what I tried to do, which is show me the fun of it, but do it at such a slow pace that practically anyone can understand this process as we move through it.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I mean, I think that goes for players and GMs is
Mm.
starting with small adventures, bite-sized adventures, not grabbing modules straight away and trying to run the whole thing because they can be a bit overwhelming. The two things I thought about this particularly, if you are a GM introducing new players, particularly if you're at like a convention or a pub event or something like that, and it's kind of an onboarding event for new players, is showcasing or demonstrating is a really powerful tool
Mhm.
because everybody's very afraid of like getting it wrong in
Mhm.
quotation marks. And we know there's very little you can do to get wrong in D&D in theory, right? And in theory on your turn in combat you can do quote unquote anything.
Mhm.
But the second bit of advice is that I had, and this was a learning for me, is being perceptive to what your specific player who is learning the game for the first time needs. Um, Tackling those one at a time. Demonstration is one of my favorite things to say when I'm introducing new players. Is I'm going to do the voices. I'm going to get into character. I'm going to be a nasty goblin man. You don't have to. You can just say my character does or my character says whatever you are comfortable with, but I'm going to do it. And then when you do the creepy little goblin voice or whatever it is, it kind of breaks down a barrier for new players to know that's okay to kind of be a bit silly and be a bit kind of role playing and be a bit quote unquote strange, but also giving them permission that they don't have to do that if they're not comfortable with it, right? So letting them kind of find where they're comfortable, but showing them how far they can push it if they want to.
Mhm.
And then that second thing being that some players will dive in and they'll have a bunch of fun and they'll be like, all right, I'm going to grab this candelabra and throw it at the guy. And you're like, all right, I'm going to figure out how to make that work. Other players prefer to play the character sheet or play the game how they're meant to. And I remember there was one woman who came to one of my tables playing a rogue, and she kept asking me how a rogue should be played. And I kept telling her, whatever you want to do, this character is your character. You play it however you think a rogue should be played. But I think that was unhelpful for her at that moment. She wanted to know what she was meant to be doing, to learn that first before she felt comfortable to branch out. So being sensitive to the needs of your new players, I think, is important.
Yeah, that's always one of my favorite bits of advice is don't tell the player you can do anything.
Yeah.
Even if that's true, right? Let them know that they could do anything, but the game is written for you to do these particular things the best. So
Sure.
focus on doing those things, right? Rather than throwing the candelabra, stab it with this dagger that's here on your character sheet. Because guess what? You can do a lot more with that than throwing the candelabra. That's not to say you can't throw the candelabra, but that's what the game expects. So the next question was, are there effective step-by-step guides or resources designed specifically for introducing brand new players to RPGs? I'm sure there are. The Peril in Pinebrook I wrote specifically for this and for game masters. So this is like new DMs and new players and potentially very young players. But there are so many different ways that you could teach new players that there's not one just go get this and it'll be perfect, because none of them are perfect.
Yeah, I agree. Nothing jumps to mind off the top of my head for this specific step-by-step introduce new players. I mean, hopefully there's about to be with the, as you alluded to, the new starter kit looks relatively promising in this way. I think Wizards of the Coast did do some videos with like the folks from Dicebreaker back when Dicebreaker was more active. I think that's no longer a website anymore, but I think it's on the Wizards of the Coast channel, is like some really bite-sized 3-minute videos that introduce a couple of concepts that might be useful. I'm not really sure. I haven't actually watched those videos.
In terms of onboarding tools that are digitally available, very few people know this, but if you go to dndbeyond.com/essentials, there is a literal walkthrough of,
oh, wow,
this is the game, create your character step by step, sort of in a choose your own adventure style. And it's been up for probably a couple years now, probably longer at this point. For a certain type of player, that would be very helpful. But you're going to have to read screen after screen. You're going to have to, right? It's not the excitement of playing at the table, right? It's reading about it. It's learning, but it's learning in a very scripted, prescribed, and academic sort of way, while there is a little bit of gameplay in there. So it's not like you're sitting at the table and rolling dice. You are reading through. So for some people, that's going to be great. For others, it's going to just not click. But it is there and it is available. The last question is, what are some practical ways experienced players and DMs can introduce newcomers without overwhelming them? Real quick, 4 steps. Know your audience's interests and tolerance for pain. So what motivates them? What is interesting to them? Focus in that direction. How much of the medicine that you need to give them to learn this game can they take at once? Don't try to force feed them the whole game. Understand their limits and stop and go to something that interests them before you keep pushing something that doesn't interest them. Start small, 20 minutes, half hour, an hour. Don't try to run a 4-hour session with new players. Unless you get into the first hour and they're still pumped up and ready to go. The aforementioned, don't tell your players your characters can do anything, if the players can't do anything and get through the adventure.
Mm.
And leave them wanting more rather than wishing there was less. So when you get to the point where this is really exciting and they've learned and you see maybe them start to flag a little bit, think about stopping there. Think about saying, okay, and you just completed your first encounter and you know that the villain is waiting in the tower with the goblin captives. And if we play again, you'll be able to rescue them. Because if you keep pushing and they start looking at their watches and they're like, oh, this is, then you will have lost them. Anything I missed? Anything to add to that list?
No, honestly, I think that ticks all the boxes. That's a very good run through in terms of just introducing people slowly and at their level, you know.
So thank you for that question. And now we're going to jump right into the news, which will also answer this question because we've gotten more videos and looks at the starter set called Heroes of the Borderlands. We talked about it last time, but now we know a little bit more about what's in the box. I only saw the Otakus and Geeks sneak peek video, which was only about 3 minutes long, but it gave a good view of what they were showing off at New York Toy Fair.
Mm.
Did you see some other avenues of information?
Yeah, I looked around. I think Polygon, off the top of my head, had a article because they went and saw it at Toy Fair as well, and kind of talked about it. And it's similar-ish information. There was also a little bit of me eyeballing like the promo images that have come out and been like, okay, this looks like that to me, and that looks like that. For example, NPC cards that have character art on one side. I'm going to assume that they have some information on the NPC on the other side, but at the bottom they say NPC character name. They weren't shouted out explicitly, but were in those promotional images. And yeah, this looks extremely tactile, extremely colorful, to the point of looking almost more like a board game, like Descent: Journeys in the Dark or Gloomhaven or something like that. Which I think is great.
Yeah, that's another way to bring in new players is if they know about board games, especially more complex board games. That transition, that middle ground between a role playing ish board game and a full role playing game is this middle ground of let me show you the pieces, and now we can just make up stories too. So that can be super helpful.
That's kind of it, right? Because my gateway into D&D eventually was through board games, and it was through games like Descent: Journeys in the Dark I had played and really enjoyed a couple of sessions of, and Star Wars Imperial Assault. And what I enjoyed about those board games was this idea that these characters were meaningful. You know, Imperial Assault doesn't have the named characters from Star Wars necessarily in it. They do appear, but they're not the characters you're playing as. So there's a sense of ownership over that character. And when I got into role-playing games, when I transitioned to D&D, it unlocked that, oh, this character is really meaningful, you know, like they have things that they do outside of the dungeon. There are decisions that get made other than just what quest do we go on next. So this feels much more like a full tapestry of a story that we're telling together. And I think what D&D does really well is balance those two things of the tactileness of a board game and the kind of more, ephemeralness of a role-playing game of we're just having a conversation. And, people may, not always, but may come from one or the other of those directions. And I think having a starter set like this really helps people who like board games but don't really get the more ephemeral side of the role-playing aspect, and might allow them to approach it like an Imperial Assault or a Descent, but then it'll unlock that other role-playing element of the game for them.
Yeah, and I think the way it looks like you build your character solves or helps to solve that dilemma of create your own character or start with a pre-gen. With this, it's the best of both worlds, hopefully the best of both worlds, where, okay, you want to play the Ranger, here's your little board. You set the board down. All right, now we're going to build your character piece by piece, right? We're going to put on the card for something because the board had spaces for equipment and for those different things. And so it hopefully will help that side of the equation in terms of teaching, where you can put things on the character sheet slowly and give the players, especially players that may be overwhelmed with too much information at once, the time to sort it all out on their own.
Well, what I like about it is also feeling, like you said, it's a big card that is your class, and that's kind of your character sheet. Your species and your background slot in on the right-hand side, I believe, as a card themselves, probably with the information on the back, if I had to guess from looking at the art or the promotional images. And then your equipment, which is prescribed depending on your class, and your spells, although we haven't seen the spell cards, at least I haven't noticed them myself, but that kind of slots in as well. So your longsword, your armor has a space on your class card where that slots in. What's really cool about this and gets me excited, and I'm sort of assuming a little bit here, but I'm pretty sure this is how it would work, is that there are also cards for magic items. I think I've seen a +1 mace. I've seen a potion of healing. And if you get that +1 mace, the GM goes, "Oh, you found this +1 mace. Here's the card. You unslot the longsword from your character sheet. You slot in the +1 mace instead." There's something very video gamey and very fun about that to me that I think is going to make the game very approachable to experienced players and kind of exciting. Approachable to new players and exciting for experienced players.
Yeah. And what we don't know for sure, at least I haven't seen, is will those cards that tell you your class be different from class to class? Because as a spellcaster, you might have a spell slot. But if you have a class that casts no spells, do you have an extra slot for something else? Do you have, if you are a ranger and you might be 2-weapon fighting, do you have 2 slots for weapons? Or put your shield if you use a shield instead, right? It's those sorts of things that I don't care exactly what they did. I just want to see how they simplified 2024 for this particular set. If they tried to cram everything in, or if they sort of dialed it back a little bit to make that first experience a little more streamlined.
Gotcha. Like whether is the character sheet, does it represent functionally a full level 1 character sheet of the main game,
Right.
just laid out differently?
Right.
Or is it streamlined in a way that there's less there, but it's,
Yeah.
more approachable in theory?
Yeah.
Well, speaking as well of jamming everything in, I think was the phrase he used. This box is going to have a lot jammed into it because on the GM side of things,
Right.
there are, I believe, 3 individual booklets for kind of the adventuring areas. I think there's one that's just the wilderness, which I'm assuming is kind of like for exploration between areas.
Right.
There's the Caves of Madness, if I'm not
Caves
mistaken.
of Chaos, I think.
Caves of Chaos, thank
Yeah.
you. And then the something tower, something citadel.
The keep.
Keep of the Borderlands.
Yeah. I don't know if that has a name. I didn't see that.
They've talked about this starter set encouraging a rotation of GMs. I don't know if that's explicit or not. Maybe it's these booklets. Like the idea is, everybody at the table could GM a booklet each to kind of create an overarching adventure. There's, like I said, NPC cards. There's full color battle maps. It looks like are going to probably accompany each of those booklets. There's monster tokens. There's stat block cards that are kind of wide cards that have the stats of the monsters on them. There's adventurer standees for the battle maps. So this box is like going to be full of a lot of cardboard and paper.
Yeah, a lot of things to poke out and place and move and hand out and take back. And so it will be interesting to see when we get a look at the full set, what sort of goodies we're looking at. But we will keep an eye on previews for that to talk more about it as it unfolds. And when it comes out, I'm sure we'll be doing a deep dive into it. Sadly, we will also be doing a deep dive into more expensive print-on-demand stuff through DriveThru role-playing games. They sent out a notification to creators about print-on-demand book prices increasing. And not by a little bit either. Starting on April 1st, mainly affecting books produced in the United States. Black and white hardcover books are going to go up from between 20 to 50% print costs in the US, only 3 to 4% increase in the UK. Softcover books may go up even more than that 20 to 50%. Color books are not going up as much, but they're still going up 12 to 13% in the US and 3% in the UK. And then premium color books are actually going to go down a little bit in price, just slightly though, just a touch, and then up a slight touch in the UK. DriveThru uses Lightning Source to do their printing both in the US and in the UK. So that is what we're looking at now in the print on demand industry.
That certainly is disappointing for consumers. Not to say that it sounds like it was a required action on behalf of DriveThru RPG, who said the reason was an increase in production supply costs, I believe. It was noted for the reason for the increase in prices. And I saw a lot of people on EN World kind of talking about how, buy your wish list now before these prices go up. I wouldn't necessarily encourage people to panic buy stuff. I don't, do whatever is financially responsible for you, because I don't like FOMO being used as a marketing strategy. But hey, if there's something you've been eyeing off and you can afford it, then maybe grab it now before those prices jump on April 1st.
Yeah, and if any Kickstarter or any crowdfunding that you've backed has already collected and they were using print on demand as a way to get you your book, look for look for publishers to maybe be reaching out, because if their cost is going to go up 50% or more for a book, and they've already collected your pledge to cover that, that's rough. That's people losing their shirts when they thought pricing was going to be one way and it turns out it's going to be another.
Yeah, I mean, and to be clear, especially with a Kickstarter-like product, when that happens outside of mismanagement, and that is not the case here, it's not good. Like if a company has to come to a group of backers and say, we need more money to complete the backing process, that's a horrendous situation for backers, right? For what it's worth, and no company I've involved in has ever had to do this, for the record, but for what it's worth, that really sucks for the company as well, because it puts them in such a rock and a tight place or hard place where they have to either ask for more money from people who have already shown financial loyalty to the company, or potentially not exist as a company anymore and struggle to fulfill the Kickstarter.
So we will again keep an eye on that as it plays out over the next couple months and then beyond, as far as we know.
Yeah.
Our last bit of news is Hasbro CEO Chris Cox did an interview with Semaphore magazine. He said a lot of interesting things in this interview, but unfortunately, most of the role-playing game news outlets focused just on the clickbaity elements and didn't cover really the nuance and subtlety of what he was saying, because he talked about AI. He didn't just talk about AI. He talked about being an AI bull and all of the ways that he uses AI in his own home games. And it just, if you only read the coverage and didn't read the actual article, you missed a lot of other interesting points. But as I've said so many times before, Chris Cox talks to investors. He doesn't talk to our players. He doesn't talk to game designers. He talks to people who want to invest in, or he wants to invest in Hasbro. And so he's going to throw the AI word around as much as possible, hoping to ramp up that excitement. So boo for him talking about AI, but also go read the article. We have a link in our show notes to look at sort of the change in direction that he made and Hasbro made when they realized that entertainment wasn't the space they want to be in, and gameplay became the space they want to be in, and how that changed the way that the company operates, basically.
Yeah, it was a very interesting interview for a whole bunch of reasons. The topics jump around a little bit. Pay attention to the subheadings if you read the article, because there were a few times it felt a bit non sequitur where I was like, wait, what are they talking about now? I think Chris Cox's opinions on AI have been pretty well expressed at this point, and I don't know whether this makes it any better or worse, but like EN World published the excerpt where he talked about AI along with Wizards of the Coast's AI policy that is published
Right.
on, I believe, D&D Beyond, that says like, we'll never use AI to generate art or writing or anything like that. And for what it's worth, and this doesn't make me pro it in any way,
Yeah.
I don't think that's what Chris Cox is talking about when he says he's an AI bull. I don't think he's talking about it as a labor replacement
Mhm.
in terms of using it to generate art and assets and writing and that sort of thing, as much as he's talking about it as a service for people to use to assist them, a D&D themed AI that DMs for you or provides ideas about game mastering, or maybe an AI that's been fed every wiki about the Forgotten Realms that can answer any question about the Forgotten Realms you have when you're a dungeon master trying to create an immersive feeling world. For better or worse, I think that's more what he's been talking about, believing that the issues with AI, the one that he talks about predominantly being that workers are
Yeah.
not adequately compensated and the plagiarism concerns,
Mhm.
are solvable. I don't know how he thinks they're solvable, but we'll see.
Right.
You go, Chris Cox, you little rascal. Ruffle his hair.
Yes, the magical solved AI issues,
Yeah,
like energy
exactly.
consumption and those sorts of things.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's if you have heard over the years people at Wizards of the Coast talking about the lack of DMs is what keeps this hobby down. It's what
sure.
keeps it from booming. And so the more tools you can give game masters, the more enhancements you can give them, the more likely that they will be to engage with the game and then engage with the players that the company wants to bring in. So
Mm,
it is they want it to be a silver bullet that it probably will never be, but that's AI everywhere, right? It's going to be
mm,
the magical thing that fixes everything except for all the times that it can't.
mm.
So we'll keep an eye on that as well. But we want to get to our main topic today here on Mastering Dungeons. We want to talk about how to make your D&D and RPG world dangerous. So what does dangerous mean? Normally when you hear the word dangerous talked about in a campaign or an adventure milieu, they're talking about the monsters. They're talking about these overwhelming encounters that you have with monsters. But the world can be dangerous in different ways. So I wanted to look at what are the dangers in D&D or in D&D settings outside of just strict combat. What were the rules in 2024 for those sorts of things? What are the new rules? What were the old rules? And then I want to
Mm.
look at how some of the Ghostfire stuff that we've worked on, especially Grim Hollow and Aurora,
Mm.
dealt with those sorts of dangers outside of combat. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. So I want to start with a question, Ben, and there is no right answer to this, but
Sure.
I wanted to get your opinion. If we did a survey of every player who had a character die in 5e 2014, what do you think the percentage of that of PC death would be from direct combat? So the character died because they were in a combat or something happened during a combat that ended up with their character death.
I mean, I've got to assume it's the majority, right? Would be
I
my assumption.
Right, because I'm trying to think of what would cause a character to die outside of combat. So during exploration, during just role playing, during the things when they're not. And my first
Mm.
thought was, well, probably like just a narrative death. Just
Sure.
a right. I sacrifice myself for this character, or I've decided I don't want to play this character anymore. So I'm going to say that she ran off, and this fate befell her.
Yeah.
But in terms of like actually rolling dice or interacting with the rules, I can think of maybe traps or hazards that might
Yeah.
kill
Yeah. Rocks
characters.
falling.
Yeah, curses or diseases, maybe. But even then, as we'll look at, there's not a lot of that can happen.
Well, I would say this as a kind of clarification on this topic is the intention from my perspective in making the world feel dangerous is making it feel more exciting to step outside the village, right?
Mhm,
That's number one. As soon as you're out the front door, you don't know what could get you. It could be a monster, it could be something else. The second thing is, upping the excitement. I had a second thing, I forgot it out of my head. But the point that I was coming to with that first point was that I don't think it's the world itself that's meant to be lethal. I don't
mhm,
think any character or any player, unless you're playing a really simulation heavy, really rules heavy, like dice rolled out in the open, whatever the dice say happens game, you probably don't want your character to die from rocks falling on your head, right? Or
mhm,
dying because you tripped over a tripwire or something like that. The hazards of the world, from my perspective, are meant to put pressure on the players
mhm.
to make potentially combat encounters or some other epic moment more exciting in its own right. So it's
Right.
not about it's about making the world dangerous, not necessarily about making the world lethal, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
It makes
Especially if the
yeah.
players are being conscientious about how they're exploring.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense, and you summed up a lot of what I was going to say much more succinctly than I could have, which is players generally don't want to die outside of those dice rolls in that combat. They don't
Sure.
want to walk into a trap, walk into quicksand, and 2 rolls later they're suffocated and they're dead. Um,
Yeah.
that's a lot of feel bad for many players. Uh, so, like you say, what we're looking for then are ways to add that add that pressure, add that danger, uh, so that it's still handled in a combat way, but it is um, ramped up a little more than maybe the base rules would dictate.
Mm. How can you get players to spend hit dice, spell slots,
Mhm,
special abilities? How can you get them to expend them in interesting ways, especially so that when they come up against the next combat threat or whatever it happens to be, it's not the choice to fight is meaningful,
mhm.
and they can't just supernova whatever it is because they've been saving all their spell slots, right? They need to use their resources to explore, and this is kind of introducing the exploration pillar. Really, is almost what this conversation is about. Is like,
Right.
how do you make that meaningful? Which we get questions about probably here and on the Lorecast endlessly.
It's true. It's true. And so that was my whole focus when we worked on Aurora. My
Mm,
whole focus was this is a world where you do not get a break, or at least not often. If you want there to be a place where you can go to recuperate, to get your breath, to get your bearings, you need to create that yourself. And so we put in exploration rules that would force you as the player to go through all the steps of moving to an area, finding the dangers, using both your might and your skills to find the best place. Take the time and use the resources to build a haven. And even then, that haven is not safe immediately. It could give you a little bit of respite, but it's not going to become a village until you put in the resources to make it a village. And then it won't
mm,
become a town until you protect it and put in the resources to make it a town. So survival and that sort of thing became part of the game. And you still needed to go off and wander and adventure, right? You come to an area and you know there's a cave over there and you've seen things coming in and out of the cave. So to make your area safe, you need to go adventure there.
mm.
Uh, so it interspersed that sort of exploration with the with the adventuring that you would normally do.
Mm. Do they call it a I've heard this term kind of recently a couple times within the last 12 months, points of light campaign.
Sure.
Is that the idea that it's like villages kind of in the wilderness between and going into that wilderness is very dangerous?
Right. Yeah,
Um,
the Forgotten Realms is supposed to be a Points of Light campaign. Right.
sorry. Did I do that out loud?
Right. And so it sort of is, but it's sort of not. Right.
Yeah.
If you think about our world, well, especially the rest of the world thinks in the United States, if you leave your house, you will be shot immediately. Um, but in our world in general, you can leave your home and you can walk, you can drive, you can go places, and you are safe getting to that other place.
Mm,
The Forgotten Realms in any D&D world or most D&D worlds go under this assumption that if you travel too far, if you go from one place to the other, there is at least that chance, whether it's through designed encounters or random encounter tables, wandering monster tables, etc., that there is a potential for danger.
mm,
But the more detailed a world gets, the more people put things into those places between the points of light. So now every 12 hours there is a way station, a an inn, a wilderness inn, whatever that
mm,
sort of takes even that away.
mm. Well, I think the bigger thing there, and I've talked about this endlessly, and it's on the run sheet here to talk about. But I think in terms of capturing that points of light campaign, which I didn't have the language for before, but that's really a lot of what we try to capture with Grim Hollow is changing the rest mechanics
Yeah,
because the big problem with wandering around the Forgotten Realms or any D&D setting where you're using the core 5e rules is that even if a settlement is a month travel between settlements because you're in a really isolated place, it doesn't matter if your players are getting all their resources back at the end of every day, because
yeah,
every day they're supernovaing every encounter. And if you try to put lots and lots of encounters in a single day, be they traps and hazards and monsters and whatever, 30 days or even 7 days is going to take sessions to play through, right?
right.
And if that's the point of your campaign, if it's a hex crawl or it's a exploration campaign in that way, then that's fine. Maybe that's the point, is to take
Mhm.
sessions and sessions and sessions to travel from point A to B. If you're doing like Journey to the West or something as your
Mhm.
campaign, and you're escorting someone or something. The way that it was devised in Grim Hollow was, and we're adjusting this to work a little bit better with the 2024 rules. But off the top of my head, it's a 1 hour rest is a quick rest, and all you get back a health via spent hit dice.
Mhm.
A short rest is 8 hours, what people traditionally think of as a long rest. And you have to go to sleep and you get the things that you would get back from a short rest, typically. And then a long rest takes 72 hours or two 8 hour periods, basically separated by a day in between. We word this much better in the new Grim Hollow rules, but something like that. But the key difference here, and it took me a moment to realize this is the key difference, is that it's not how long you rest, because players can just say, okay, well, we stay in this spot for 2 days. Is it over yet? Can we continue adventuring now? It has to be in a place of safety, like
Mhm.
a village, an inn, something like that. And the change that makes is that players can't rest in dungeons. They can't get, or wizards can't get their spell slots back in a dungeon. They have to leave and go back to town, which, as you've talked about before, Shawn, in terms of like, a game is a machine, and as you plug different things into it, the machine changes.
Mhm.
This is, in my experience of playing 5th edition, a drastic change to 5e,
For sure.
because it means that the mega dungeon becomes a completely different proposition
Mhm.
when you can't rest in the mega dungeon because there are no places of safety.
Yeah.
And so getting between those points of light becomes a lot more fraught. The thought that you just gave me before, sorry, not to dither on too much, but in reference to Aurora and the idea that like, here's your settlement, but it's not safe here, so you might have to move somewhere else or whatever, is what if you're running a points of light campaign, but those points of light disappear,
Right.
or that, like a journey from one place to another takes 3 days and you're exhausted at the end of those 3 days. but then some catastrophe, a volcano erupted, a dragon fell upon it, the great beast wandered by, something happened to that earlier village. You've got to go back and investigate. It takes you 3 days to get back there, and it's not safe anymore.
Yep.
Where's the next safest place to get to? Instantly ramps up this sense of danger when playing 5e.
Right. And it makes the cadence of 5e, the cadence that they've moved to in 5e, it makes it much more reasonable, especially at level 5 on, to actually challenge the party. And challenge them in a way that doesn't make you do backflips to justify the timing. So you don't have to, as you said, have 12 encounters between, in the 8 hours that you travel from this point to this point. You can slow it down. You can have those encounters, and instead of Nova, sleep Nova, it does it much more smoothly with the way that these rules are written.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, have one encounter on each day. They're getting their long rests in between, but they're not. They're short rests in between, but they're not getting those long rests. You could also it makes the choice to fight a lot more drastic. Let's say the party are on their way to go defeat a dragon or something like that, and on the way they come up against a band of ruffians who have roughed another group of travelers up, and the party are like, "Well, we should intervene here. It would be the heroic thing to do, but this is going to cost us resources. We're not going to get back. The ruffians themselves are not going to kill us. We are more powerful than them. They're not the danger."
Right.
But if we go into this fight with the dragon, having spent all our healing before we get there, we could be in real danger then, amping up the excitement and making decisions more difficult in the game.
Right. Which, again, is what we talked about. That implies the danger, right? That drives the danger home to the players. It ramps up that energy. That's not just, well, we'll just, like you said, Ben, 8 hours done yet? Can I go?
Yeah.
I've got all my fireballs now. Here we go. Let's do this.
Yeah.
And so it is, as you said, putting a piece into the machine that will change the machine drastically, and takes not just attention to detail in terms of how it will change the rules, but as I said, it will change the way that the stories are meant to be put together as you create the blueprint for your adventures and for your campaigns.
I suspect we're running out of time, but just quickly, I wanted to ask, what are some because this long rest mechanic, we're still kind of talking about combat encounters between them. What are some non-combat challenges, Shawn, that you use to try to make the world feel hazardous without necessarily being a monster or a person?
You can do a similar thing than with the rest mechanic you can do with things like diseases.
Okay.
You can put that impetus on, do I continue or do I try to rest and try to break this disease or break this curse, or something that is a cumulative thing that happens over time that you can't just snap your fingers and fix. So, but with what Wizards of the Coast did with 2024 is they removed all mention of regular diseases. They changed them, though, to be called magical contagions. And as far as I can tell, that's just still diseases, because you can just cast a spell and it goes away.
No, you can't.
Well,
this is the thing.
It depends. It depends on the contagion, but yes.
Does
Go
it?
ahead. I think so.
I was going to say, so the keyword disease, which was used in 2014, lesser restoration, I believe, removed diseases.
Right.
Lesser restoration no longer refers to diseases or magical contagions, and neither does greater restoration. So as far as I'm aware, magical contagions are removed through making saving throws at the end of long rests. But I don't think, short of something like heal, you can necessarily like.
Right. It might be a greater restoration that I read.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe.
Yeah.
But they've definitely
that's high
made them
level.
more difficult to deal with. You know.
Yeah. And that's the sort of thing also that ramps up the tension, ramps up the angst, tells a more interesting story, gives more interesting choices. And since 2024 removed that word disease is a huge part of Grim Hollow. So as we began to go through the transformed and waiting for the player's handbook and the DMG and the monster manual to come out, we were sort of on pins and needles waiting to see what would happen. And now that we know, we have to pivot and make some of our own alterations to make things work in ways that you can still tell a fun story without overwhelming, but also without coddling the players.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully, and we don't know this legitimately, magical contagion end up in the SRD. We'll see.
We will find out hopefully in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
Ben, thank you so much for coming on to join us and replace Teos, as if anybody could replace Teos. But you have done an excellent job.
Thank you for having me. I always enjoy being here.
And I'm going to cut that short because Ben and I have another podcast to do. But I want to thank everybody out there, all our listeners, all our backers on our Patreon. We will see you next time here on Mastering Dungeons.